All right. Well, hello, everyone. My name is Amy Gantman, and I'm the Executive Director of the Brentwood Arts Center. And I thank you and welcome you to our virtual auditorium tonight for the third presentation of our new Conversations on Art series with our host, Meg Linton, and guest artist, Audrey Chan. It's been a challenging time for the world and for the BAC as we transitioned our offerings to a virtual format, which has allowed the BAC to continue to fulfill its mission of providing high quality arts educational opportunities to students of all ages. Our success is due to our incredible and generous board of directors, leadership council, donors, staff, faculty, and students who support the BAC through thick and through thin. The pandemic has also allowed us to experiment with new technology and to create programs like Conversations on Art. And I want to say, I thank our anonymous donor who has made this series possible for the next 12 months. We can only do all that we do because of our generous donors who believe everyone should have access to the arts and to education. Our host, Meg Linton, and I met at Otis College of Art and Design while she was the director of exhibitions at the Ben Maltz Gallery, and I was the dean of continuing education. We collaborated on many public programs, and I'm thrilled we are able to bring Meg's love and respect for artists to the BAC. She has been visiting artist studios for over 20 years in her various roles as director and curator of contemporary art spaces in the Central and Southern California regions. Currently, Meg is working on an exhibition about the life and work of artist Keith Julius Puccinelli. She's writing a novel and, of course, conversing with Audrey Chan for the BAC this evening. Welcome, Meg.
Thank you, Amy. It's a real pleasure to be here. And I want to thank the Brentwood Arts Center and the whole team, and Juliet and Hannah, who are working behind the scenes to make our program possible. And I also just want to remind everyone today that we're recording this program. And if you have any questions, please put them in the chat feature. You can type them in, and I will either work them into the conversation or I will save them till the end when we have a Q&A session, and we kind of open it up at that point. So I'm really excited about today's program. Audrey Chan is a wonderful LA-based artist, illustrator, writer, educator, and activist. Her artistic practice takes many forms, includes drawing, painting, public art, exhibitions, publications, and video that challenges dominant historical and narrative structures. She has a mobile studio in the form of a laptop, and this is so she can be wherever she needs to be and working with her community of wonderful people she works with. And so to prepare for this talk, we actually met on the sidewalk in front of her mural at the ACLU building in downtown Los Angeles. And then we meandered over to a coffee shop and had our studio visit there. So it was kind of a wonderful antithesis to DJ Hall, who has a full painting studio. So this is a really great addition to our program. Audrey and I met in 2012 when I invited her and her collaborator, Alana Mann, to participate in a biannual project I had created at Otis called 3 Solo Projects. So this was an exhibition structure where I divided the Ben Maltz Gallery into 3 sections. So it wasn't such a daunting space. And so Alana Mann had a section, Audrey had a section, and then Chan and Mon had a section, if I say that correctly. And this is where Audrey in her solo section really got to experiment with a new way of working. And she created a wonderful mural called The Center of the Universe, Ama, and I am going to forward it to this right now. And it was really great to work with her on this project because she was trying new methods of drawing. And I'm sorry, I don't know what happened. And it allowed her to really experiment and work with fabricators for the first time as well. There we go. Sorry about my technical difficulty here. We're back in action with the slideshow. So Audrey.
Yes.
I'm going to hand this over to you to talk about Ama and kind of how you started working with this piece, which my computer's going crazy.
Yeah, I want to thank you. I want to thank Amy and the Brentwood Arts Center for hosting tonight's talk. When Meg reached out to me about this virtual studio visit, I'm like, I'm so long overdue for a conversation with Meg, so this will be so great. Yeah, because this working with you on this project was so pivotal for me. Even though the space was split up into 3 sections, the Ben Maltz Gallery was very daunting. Like Ilana and I had never worked in a space so large and grand and like elegant before. They had like soaring ceilings with like skylights. And I just saw this wall that was just like bathed in light. And I was like, I would love to fill this wall somehow. And my grandma, who I grew up with, who I call Ama, she was going through dementia at the time, and it was really hard for me to like be so far away because my family lives in Chicago, and so I was just like processing that, and I was really thinking about like how to represent our relationship, which felt like bigger than something that I could represent, but I just knew I wanted to see her on a monumental scale because she was like a very diminutive person, and she didn't like drawing attention to herself, but for me she was like she's like one of my most important muses in my life. And so I was like really interested in doing more work dealing with like allegory. I had been working as a gallery educator at the Getty Museum at the time, and that really like helped me warm back up to drawing and like image making after several years of like during Cal Arts and after, where I was doing more like performance art and like video and organizing, and I'd really like gotten away from like my lifelong love of drawing. And so I started working on all these like illustrations just like one by one, and I decided to work them into like a vector format so they could be scaled infinitely in Adobe Illustrator. So this is really one of the first times I took what was kind of like a sketchbook practice and made it digital so that it could be translated into this large scale. And I was really interested in like East Asian like landscapes that have like this, well, now they're so aged that a lot of them have this kind of tan negative space where they're like clear narrative scenes kind of coming in and out of view, but they're almost like floating scenes. And I wanted to see what I could do with it. But you could read it from like right to left or left to right as well.
Well, and I think what was interesting too is because we were coming off the tails of the project we did for the Getty PST on the history of the Women's Building. And so when we were talking about this idea, we were talking about it being kind of a her story, that you were kind of recording of your Ama, because you have very personal moments in here, but also there are political moments. And you kind of talked about how this was kind of capturing the 24-hour news cycle, and kind of how you kind of built the narrative, because it kind of has this almost circular structure kind of going on.
Yeah, I was really trying to do a lot of things at once in this piece. So like on the left, there's a kind of reference to like political executions in communist China. I have like, my grandma just loved reading constantly. And so I have her in this kind of like allegorical figurative pose as if she's a scholar and she's holding like an oak leaf, because like I'm from Oak Park, Illinois. And I was kind of referencing the use of scale in this famous painting of like Dante's, this like Dante's cycle, and how like in medieval and like early Renaissance art, Western art, figures would be scaled according to like their narrative importance. So when something's more important, it's like bigger, and you can have multiple figure appearing multiple times to show like the passage of time or moving through different places. And there's like a reference to like the Sandy Hook massacre that was at that time, and like drone strikes, because my grandma was like reading the newspaper every day, like the Chinese language newspaper. And so I was like, what is she reading about and thinking about that's in the news? And there's like an Anderson Cooper type reporter in the middle. So it's, and then there's also like the lullaby that she would sing to me from the time I was little. And a lot of it is influenced by my dad telling me about my family history and her story, because I honestly wouldn't know a lot of that if he hadn't translated that for me. And yeah, so you can see these little details. And so I was really trying to picture the complexity of our relationship, like for the first time in this way. And it's one of those pieces that I feel like is forever incomplete, because that's kind of an impossible project to capture all that. So, but it just like opened me up to this idea that you could have very like intimate drawings, but experience them in this kind of like immersive installation, mural size scale. And I was like thinking about, well, it got fabricated on vinyl, so it like went up as if it were like a billboard.
Do you still have it?
It's rolled up under my bed.
Where all the best artwork is usually.
So it's very close to home right now.
One of the things we talked about was this, and this will come up with the other murals as well, is kind of this narrative legibility. And some of the challenges maybe that you learned from making this piece, or really struggled with deciding on how to lay out the narrative. Yeah. And how important it is, because this seems like it's little snippets, so it's not really a linear narrative. It does kind of have a circular flow to it.
And I mean, for me, there wasn't a way to tell like a linear story of our relationship, because it was like ongoing. And also there's this movement between past and present, because during dementia, like my grandma was like experiencing like her childhood in real time, like alongside everyday life. And like her memory was kind of collapsing space and time as well. I felt like so raw when when I was working on this piece and when it went up, that I was really like so close to it and the subject matter. And I heard from so many people that they felt like they should be able to decipher a narrative based on like how it was drawn, because it's like so illustrative. But at the same time, they felt like it was so unusual, or like they didn't know how to enter into it, because it was so like unfamiliar imagery, and it was hard for them to like find a place in it. And so I really had to like sit with that for a while. And it honestly took me like a couple years of just like living with like a smaller scale version of the piece at home for me to realize that that's actually like why allegory is so powerful. Because I think when we like inherit cultural allegories that are like passed down to us, we take for granted that they were like invented at one point, and that they have a powerful function of when we have like shared symbols or meanings, like we can just be queued up to them. But that when stories that are lesser told are like put into that space, it kind of like disrupts that system. And so I was like, wow, I actually want my work to keep putting quote unquote like unfamiliar or lesser known stories like into this kind of allegorical framework. So that actually like became a goal of mine, whereas like it started off almost coming off as like a negative response, because like the work I had done prior to that point was much more like confrontational and direct in its messaging. So it was almost like a direct conversation, whereas this was like really unpacking a lot of memory and experiences that were shared like just within my family.
Yeah. But also these memories, I mean, it's like you have chosen things that people are familiar with, seeing elders with walkers and the birds.
Yeah.
We've seen explosions. We've seen, you know, so there is this kind of universality that really comes through too. So even if you may not get the particulars about some traumatic events, you know that there's traumatic events that are happening. So it's really working on multiple levels.
Yeah, and I think that's also like has a lot to do with like the immigrant experience of like your life in America may be very like peaceful and idyllic and calm in so many ways, but like the experiences that led one to immigrating can be often like violent and traumatic, and like families like contain those memories and don't always like to talk about them, but they're all like coexisting with like your current reality.
Yeah.
It doesn't have to just be like from the immigrant experience, but I think we all like live those simultaneous kind of extremes like on a daily basis.
Yeah, and it's so we're going to move on from this to talking about your big residency. You were the inaugural artist at the ACLU and their new residency program.
Yeah.
And then COVID hit.
Yeah, it started in fall of 2019.
Yeah. So, and how kind of share with us some of the things that may have translated over from, you know, the story of Amma, moving over into this kind of mural and this project where it's not the personal narrative of you, you know, these are, you know, members of the community and people that the ACLU wanted to highlight and kind of talk about the history of the project, kind of how it came about and so forth.
Yeah, I think one of the things that like learning about my family's like political story really affected in me was like understanding that like the personal and political are like deeply intertwined, and that's something that I explored more in like my feminist art research as well in prior years. And that for me, like I think it's really important for aesthetically to represent like political reality in like a really intimate and tender way, and as opposed to like agitprop or like a more kind of strident messaging. And so, I mean, there are certain similarities that you can see, like my style of drawing is like very much like flat color, like crisp, like outlines. My work is like really influenced by like cartoons and graphic novels and like animation. And yeah, so I was drawn to apply to the ACLU residency because like I had admired the organization's work so much for so many years. Like for me, like art and political science were like my like avenues of study in undergrad, and it's always been something that I've tried to imbue into my artwork. And early on in the residency, we talked about this idea of like working on a mural together. It took a while to identify like their actual like LA headquarters on 8th Street in Westlake as kind of the ideal canvas because they own the building. And I really owe so much to them to really rally behind this artwork. It's quite courageous to like transform their physical presence in the city in this way. And they rent out the first floor of their office building to an urgent care center. So originally the urgent care had painted the building like aqua green, kind of like a standard hospital type color. And we changed it up.
You changed it up a lot.
Yeah. And we talked about like, this is a very site-specific piece too, because directly across from the ACLU is the LA Police Protective League. So they're better known as like the police labor union, but they function as like a lobbying arm of the police, and they keep accountability for abuse of force from taking place. And they, because of the racial justice uprisings of last summer, ACLU organizers and like Black Lives Matter activists were talking about how they could like further their campaign to like defund the police and to draw attention to the corruption of the police union, Police Protective League. And like they also identified the ACLU building as like a prime site to do something like impactful in public space. And so everything kind of converged. And so that really like lit the flame, but also like the ACLU works on a really great range of like intersectional issues around like immigration, First Amendment, education equality, LGBTQ and reproductive rights, housing and economic justice. And so it was like, how do we tie all these different threads together? And a lot of it is through the organizers and activists who have their boots on the ground, like fighting for these issues, whose like own life stories embody so many of these battles that have been fought for generations. And so they are all like gazing out in a hopeful way to whoever is looking and passing by, but they're also confronting the Protective League that's like directly across the street. So there's that duality in their like stance.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's also this like marble slab that like sticks out, that juts out from above the entrance. And it was really like an eyesore before. It just didn't feel like it fit the rest of the building. I thought, let's work with that. We can actually have it serve this function of being like the protest sign of
Mm-hmm.
the building. So you could have this kind of landscape of organizers like rallying people while also like being very clear about what we're all fighting for.
It also, to me, it also looks like a checklist.
Yeah.
You know, so this is the list that we need to work on. So
yeah. And it's kind of alarming how inverted the city's own like budget priorities are. The fact that police get like more than $3 billion a year, and that there's so many unhoused people who just don't have access to like basic human rights. I think like working with the ACLU really opened my eyes to like the really nuts and bolts ways that the city is like malfunctioning and inhumane in
Mm-hmm.
so many ways, and like the network of organizations and advocates that are like working day and night to change that.
Well, in preparing for this mural, and looking at the project website, there was, I think maybe it was the hyperallergic. Thank you. Hyperallergic article where they had the videos, of talking with people who were in shelters during COVID and what that was like. And that was really, listening to those is really powerful. I've put the link, the project link in the chat section. So if anybody wants to visit that later. So, finding these stories and looking at the work that they do and then kind of coming up with this mural, yes, were these people that the ACLU picked that you decided to represent?
Yeah, it was
or
us.
Was it a give and take, or?
Yeah, it was really a lot of people weighing in on who would be included. So it was like ACLU staff, myself, organizers with Black Lives Matter Los Angeles, the Trans Latina Coalition, People's City Council, and K-Town for All. And then for people who are still alive, they were reaching out to them individually. So some people are like community partners of the ACLU, and some people are present day organizers who are like working on these issues. And so the vetting process, a lot of it happened with the ACLU staff who I was working with, who are on their who run their communications and marketing team, and they are very much about not just pushing out whatever like wins and losses there are with their cases, but also like highlighting the individuals who all these issues are impacting. Yeah, so here's some more process. So like a lot of people don't know that the ACLU SoCal is like the first affiliate of the national organization. It was like co-founded by writer and activist Upton Sinclair. So there he's actually getting like arrested by the LA police for supporting longshoremen in San Pedro. And Dr. Melina Abdullah is co-founder of Black Lives Matter, and she's pouring libations. And that was like a really important like allegorical image I wanted to include, because that's how they open all of their protests, with honoring like the ancestors of people, or honoring like spiritual ancestors, like people who've been killed by police, and also like past movement leaders. And if you go back to the previous slide, you can actually see that, though I kind of forgot that tree was there, luckily there's like a little tree that they actually like water a plant at the beginning. They pour libations to like honor each person, and it just really worked out that
it was one of like those lucky circumstances.
Yeah, some things you can plan for, some things are just really happy accidents.
Yes.
And there's also like really lush like healing plants native to Southern California interwoven. And the background is actually based on Kenneth Hahn Park, and they're kind of like nestled into this like civic park scene. And then Marjan Vayahan, who I believe is an Otis alum.
Yes,
she is. Yeah, her uncle was made famous during the Trump's Muslim ban. Her uncle's Ali Vayahan, who was coming from Iran to visit them. And I remember her post on Facebook that week about them waiting for him, just like how desperate they were to find out like what had happened to him, needing to like work with the ACLU, and just like how dramatic that whole situation was for her family. And so it was like really special for me on a personal level, because like she's a friend of mine and past collaborator too, to like honor and uplift them in this way after going through so much trauma. And Hector Barajas is he was a veteran of the US military who was deported. And so he actually organizes like other deported veterans to like fight to be able to return to the US, for whom they like risk their lives, and some who lost their lives. And there are lots of little numbers on him, because I worked with this amazing fabrication team led by Adair Satina, the LA Art Collective and Wilson Satina Group. So they were instrumental to this piece happening. They were the ones who were like up on lifts painting every night for 2 weeks and translating my pretty detailed drawings onto brick, which is really, really, really challenging, and working around like weird architectural details. But I was there kind of making like a paint by number guide for each of the elements of the artwork. Yeah. And then some people I made up because we didn't have a specific person to represent, like, for example, street vendors,
Right.
their fight to be legalized. So there are some people who are invented.
So so you were saying the numbers on his jacket and so forth in this image were for the fabricators? Were they referring to like colors of paint or?
Yeah, I made a color guide.
Okay.
They had like a type of like house paint they were using. And so
Yeah.
I like tried to match their colors to what I had designed digitally.
Okay.
And that would kind of.
It's an elaborate process.
Oh yeah, it's
Yeah.
pretty elaborate. I'm so lucky that we worked with them. So this is just some of like how the image came together. I was trying to figure out like how to unify this like really horizontal landscape, horizontal facade of the building, because it's broken up by so many windows and like that marble slab. And so I took all these photos at Kenneton and kind of like stitched them together. We didn't end up putting that big text along the bottom, which is fine because that part of the building gets tagged a lot, but these are just some like early ideas. And then I brought out the old pencil and paper and tried to like unify it into a kind of park scene that I could like then simplify. So sometimes like digital is a way to go and sometimes analog needs to come in too. Right. Yeah, and these were really like when I work this way, I make like individual resolved images and then like layer them in and place them and move them around and make different vignettes. So this is when we're still very early on, just trying to figure out what would it look like to have figures appearing between the windows. And then this is what it looks like in action. So the building itself is activated every Wednesday by Black Lives Matter Los Angeles. So the building that you see on the right, the tan building with the windows, is the Police Protective League. So it's such a crazy juxtaposition of two organizations with such opposing values, like on the same block. But the activists like claim that block for a few hours and have a weekly rally. And I just love the image on the left because it's student activists, and right above them is like a painting of student activists. And so like one of the goals for me and for the organization was for this artwork to, in a way, like to announce that this was like a welcome space for community organizing and the exercise of free speech. So
well, it seems like you've successfully accomplished that.
Yeah, I mean, it was like such a huge honor to work on this, that I feel like I was kind of the messenger of like a larger wave of energy. But it was great. I had never worked on a public art project that came together this quickly. I think we started talking about it in like July, and I think I finished the design around September, and it was painted like between Thanksgiving and Christmas. That just like doesn't happen in the public art world. There's usually.
So it's coming up on the year anniversary.
Yeah, yeah, it's really wild. But I think I knew it was it felt real when it appeared on Google Maps Street View.
Oh, that's exciting.
I'm like, yep, okay, it's real now.
Yeah. And I also just want to say too that the project website actually has detailed bios on everyone who's pictured in the mural, and it's really a great resource to kind of find out more about it. And if you can, go and visit it. What's the address again? It's right on 8th Street, isn't it?
1313 West 8th Street.
Yeah, it's worth
just west of the 110 8th Street exit.
Yeah. And it's worth a visit to go down there and see it in person.
Yeah.
So this is your next project that you're working on, which is the Metro project in the Little Tokyo and the Arts District.
Yeah.
So, which you've been working on. It's the antithesis of this one coming together so quickly. This one's been going on for years.
Yeah. So I first did this proposal in 2015. And it was accepted in 2016. And I worked on developing the artwork and doing community outreach and research consistently like through 2019. And now I think just like 2 weeks ago, the fabricators have completed the final panels. So this is like 14 panel assemblies that are going to be on the walls of the lower level of the subway station that's under construction at First and Central in Little Tokyo in downtown LA.
What's the scale of the panels?
So each one is about 12.5 feet wide by 13 feet tall. And when this was first described to me, I was like, oh, so you're gonna get like 14 artists do 14 panels. And they're like, actually, if you got it, it would be all you. And I was just like, oh, okay. I like took several steps back. Like, I was like, wow, that kind of reminds me of the scale of like grand cathedrals.
Yes.
You know, where you have these like soaring compositions. And I was like, wow, that's a lot of responsibility. And just from what little I knew then of the history of Little Tokyo, I was like, there's a lot that needs to happen in this artwork to really honor the community that is there and has been there and what they've experienced. And also like the neighboring communities and like how they all come together. And so I really came into this project from a place of humility and knowing that there was like so much I had to learn and so much I had to ask. So each of these drawings, like no drawing came lightly in this piece because it wasn't like autobiographical. In a lot of ways, like I feel like the authority of these stories belong with others. And I'm like a translator and like arranger of them. And I was just trying to like follow what I was learning at any given time.
So were you interviewing people as you were doing your research, and how were you collecting kind of stories, and were you walking the neighborhood? And
yeah, like I would have conversations and just like kind of, I would pick up like breadcrumbs. It was like breadcrumbs in the forest, like different things would come up like, oh, well, you know, there's this incredible legacy confectionery on First Street. We need to honor them in some way. And so like you see this tree full of like mochi and manju. So like I literally like went and bought like their full array. And so that was like really delicious kind of research.
Yes.
And I was like, oh, how do I find a way to like present them? And my friend Elon is like an incredible tree photographer, and he had photographed this tree that felt like a like overscale topiary. And so like that I think this is like the most fantastical moment, but it's like surrounded by like historical images from like personal and public archives. So like, for example, like Steve Wong and Leslie Ito, that's a photo of them from like when they lived in the arts district. So the piece like also deals with the arts district history, Skid Row, the Tongva Nation, when the neighborhood was Bronzeville during World War II, and became a predominantly Black neighborhood. And yeah, so it was like, I think I have this larger interest in like how to weave complex narratives together that don't often get to speak together or like separated in some way. And that family portrait is kind of a collapsing of time, because that's when they were just like first going out, but then I'm like weaving in their children from later on too. And along the bottom is the Fandango Obon, that is like a multicultural music and dance festival. So the Obon is like a Buddhist circle dance that is part of rituals at like Japanese Buddhist temples to like honor ancestors. Mm-hmm. But the Fandango Obon, thinking of Fandango and Obon, I think Nobuko Miyamoto was the founder of the group, and they combine like Mexican, West African, and Arab like dance and music traditions in a kind of multicultural mm-hmm. exchange. And so like along the bottom of each of the panels, I had to think about like, okay, these are like 14 separate panels, but I want them to feel like it's just like this, you're surrounded by this like community celebration.
Right.
So along the bottom are people in procession all the way around. So it kind of reflects the movement of Obon, which is like a circle dance or procession, but sometimes the procession is protesting, they're dancing, they're celebrating. Mm-hmm. So there's all kinds of different things that happen.
Nice that you have the movement kind of going through it. And it's also, I mean, there's just a warmth to these images that's really beautiful. And I know when we've talked before, it's like one of your influences is Richard Scarry.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Busy Town.
Yes. Busy Town. And there was the New Yorker cartoonist.
Yeah.
too,
Saul Steinberg.
Yeah. That you had spoken about. So there's this very, there's complicated stories here and so forth, but there's also, you're just inviting people in and not making it intimidating.
Yeah, I definitely saw this as a like more is more kind of project.
Yeah.
So I just, that volume of drawing was kind of new for me. So working on the iPad was really helpful. And this little video kind of gives a look.
Yeah, so this is a little video we're going to show you because it also, we were thinking about the idea of a studio space as well. And this is a little video that Metro did with Audrey.
My name is Audrey Chan, and I'm creating artwork for the Metro Regional Connector Little Tokyo Arts District Station. My process involves a lot of like moving things around, changing the scale, seeing different relationships that can happen between different images. This is the first time I've worked on a piece that could be considered permanent. And so it made me think, what is worth committing to history?
So this is where the station's going to be, right?
Yeah, so these are like the top left is a mock-up of like what the street level will be. And the Claire Rojas, who's a Bay Area painter, is designed like the glass facade of the station. Mm-hmm. And right now it's like kind of an open construction site. And the image below was a historical image from directly across the street when Japanese Americans were boarded onto buses and taken to internment camps during World War II. And so like for me, just like being tasked with like working at that site was so emotionally charged for me. And the fact that like it's literally like within the earth of Los Angeles, and also thinking about like the Tongva Nation and like they are like of this place. And how do I allow all those stories to kind of be really present and in the present moment? And on the right is me and Pearl Shung, who's second from the right, and our Metro project managers. We took like a walking tour of this new regional connector that's connecting like multiple existing train lines through I believe 3 different train stations like in downtown LA. So we walked from like, this will never happen again. I will never experience this again. Like walking from one station to another on what will be future like train tracks So it really felt like both being like in the future and like ancient past at the same time.
Mm-hmm. That's exciting. And so when will this open?
Next fall of 2022.
So it's really coming along.
Yeah. So it's one of those things where I literally had to like put some distance between myself and the project, like in 2019 when I handed off the digital file, because I was just like working on this thing. Like my mind was like in every single detail for like years. And at a certain point you have to stop.
Yes, you do.
Like
they have to take it away from you.
Like a blessing and a curse for me, because I feel like I could have spent like another 10 years on that project and it still wouldn't have been done. But at a certain point you have to stop and just say, this is not going to be the last time that people are going to make work about Little Tokyo. This is just one of many public artworks in the neighborhood.
Well, and also you don't know where this research will lead you at some point too. It may circle back around.
And it's also really interesting to have done that like so early in my career, because I feel like, I had this feeling like it's like having one of your early works be so permanent and public, but I just need to, that's why I've just been like continuing to do more projects, because it honestly like taught me, I learned so much by working on that project about like the importance of like having conversations in community, like how images are negotiated, how like storytelling and place can be like really intertwined. So that's, it was a life-changing project for sure.
That's fantastic. And then, so you go from something that's going to be so permanent, and then we're talking about this mural that really just exists virtually.
Yeah. So I was lucky enough to be invited to work alongside Nancy Baker Cahill, Joel Garcia, and Patrick Martinez as a cohort of artists developing virtual monuments that would be experienced in Nancy Baker Cahill's augmented reality app, the Fourth Wall app. And it's a really amazing, like grassroots, like public art app where there are these
sites. Global.
Yeah, it's global. She has pieces like all around the world, but you have to like be at the sites where the artworks are geolocated for them to appear. So I was talking about the LA Police Protective League, and they wanted these monuments to like be monuments for the future, whether it's the near future or the distant future, and to address like inequities and to deal with like LA subjects. And, it kind of took me a while to arrive at this, even though it seems obvious now, that I was like, I'm already connected to this site of like current mobilizing and action and dreaming of a police-free future. And right now, a lot of the calls are about dismantling the LA Police Protective League. And I was like, well, let's think about what that natural consequence would be, is like you have this shell of a building. Could it be transformed into a community center? And can a community center be regarded as a memorial, or not memorial, monument? Because monuments don't just have to be like equestrian statues to like Civil War generals. They can be like what we want to uplift as a society, and what we want to like celebrate and like commemorate, and also like what we want to fight for in an ongoing way. So this on the left is like what you see actually there. And then when you hold up your phone with the app on, my AR kind of like replica, but a transformed building appears to subsume it. So you can kind of, it's like a virtual prototype of what it would be like to have that site be like serving community as opposed to harming it.
So for people who don't know about the app, when you go, so I met with Audrey on the sidewalk across the street from this building in front of her mural that we talked about. And she pulled up on her phone and said, look here, look through the camera. And so when I looked through her phone, this is where the image showed up of the building covered in greenery and plants and so forth with this message on it. So it was pretty exciting, and it's supposed to keep growing, this collection of virtual monuments.
Yeah. So it's like installed in perpetuity, like within the app.
Yes.
And it's called the Asada Center because this quote from Asada Shakur is like read at the end of like all BLM LA protests. And it's just like such an incredible message. And I remember when I first interviewed for the ACLU residency, I was like, the Protective League has this really great wall across the street. Wouldn't it be cool to do something there? It's like, we can dream. And so this was kind of like,
always looking for more landscape.
Yeah. I mean, like they're not doing anything with that wall. And I was like, in LA, like visual, like space on buildings is like at such a premium, will catch eyeballs as you drive by. And I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if like their message was installed right on that building?
So for everyone, I put the link to the app inside the chat so you can copy it from there if you want to check it out.
So
this is another image from the kind of two buildings.
So it's like these buildings are kind of like facing off, but I just love this scene from one of the protests or rallies where they do like radical stretching to like prepare their bodies and to open up to like the experience and the work of doing social justice. And it's just like, I wanted to take that energy and put it across the street,
Yeah. It's exciting.
And to inform the process, like very much inspired by the Metro process, I made, in this case, I was more like of a formula or a form where I created like a Google form survey, posing all these questions about like, why should such and such space be abolished? What would you want to see in that space? I believe this is from Marjan, who was in the mural, and Otis alum actually participated in the survey, and this is an excerpt from her response. So it's just like all these things I love when
everything's kind of interconnected.
And like the messages are kind of come out in different ways. So I had a steep learning curve learning 3D modeling, but I really kind of took a bunch of shortcuts. I used screenshots of the actual building from like Google Street View and like assembled them together into this like composite building and added in solar panels so it could be off the grid. And
I like that your process really you're using the handmade, using your hand drawing and then scanning it back in, and just kind of it's really fluid going back and forth. I know at Otis they taught that through the foundation year in terms of the drawing skills were just as important as learning any of the new technology. So we're kind of running out of time, but I want to make sure we get to these projects as well. Sure. So let's kind of quickly go through these and then we can see if there's any questions.
Sure, I just wanted to show that I work in like painting also, and kind of what's been happening over the past couple of years is I have these extremely kind of like large multiple communities coming together to like make these public artworks, but I love just like learning and telling stories about my family. And so the image on the left is from an illustrated vocabulary of tenderness, where I developed all these images based on like Chinese English language flashcards, but like replace kind of generic images with really personal ones, like me and my son when he was just born. And then on the right, I was invited to make an altar for the Dia de los Muertos exhibition at Self-Help Graphics during the pandemic. So unfortunately, no one got to see the show in person, but they had this incredible niche, and I created an altar to my grandma because I missed her so much. And yeah, this is a project that's up at the USC Pacific Asia Museum in Pasadena right now.
Just opened.
Yeah, just opened last Friday. And I was mentioning how like my family would read like the World Journal newspaper. It's like Chinese language newspapers were like a kind of like lifeline to like connect with like world news, but in Chinese language media. But my Chinese language skills are extremely mediocre. So I wanted to, the show was called Intervention, curated by Rebecca Hall, and she wanted us diasporic, like Asian American artists, to reflect on like the Pam's collection and our like diasporic experiences. And so I created my own version of like a community newspaper, but like telling really personal stories and weaving in collection objects into the illustrations. So that one's like about remembering when like the Tiananmen Square massacre was on TV on like the nightly news, and then later on like learning about like communist China and how that intersected with my family story. So and the image on the right, like that lullaby that I incorporated into the Otis piece, I kind of brought it back in a different form. But I literally took the images from the Otis piece and assembled them here. Yeah, so I made this.
And it's
as like
nice that you can carry
stand.
these images on into different bodies of work.
Yeah, I think that's been helpful for me, not to see like each project as closed, but like this kind of porous collection of allegorical imagery that's still relevant throughout my life.
And you'll be, you know, you're building your own visual language over time.
Yeah.
Which is really beautiful. And if you go to the Pacific Asia Museum to see the exhibition, you can actually pick up your own copy of Audrey's newspaper. So wanted to open it up and just see if there's any questions. I know we're kind of at our time limit, but it's been a real pleasure talking with you, Audrey.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Meg. And thank you everyone for listening in.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions? We'll just give them a second because we know people have to type it in. Oh, we got a new message.
Hi, Deborah.
Oh, we just got Deborah saying that was so great, Audrey. Thank you.
Thank you, Deborah.
Deborah Aschheim's another amazing artist that works with drawing and interviewing people and has done an incredible project about voting rights.
Yeah, and I worked with Rick, just commented, and Rick was one of the people who he assembled like Japanese American National Museum docents to give me feedback like while I was working on the piece, and like I was able to incorporate some of that feedback. So
yeah, there's always a lot of people behind the scenes working on these large public projects.
Oh yeah, the mural made a cameo on HBO. It was really cool. I was like, wow, this is new. Yeah, literally for like maybe 2 seconds. 2 seconds. It was on like the opening scene of season 5, episode 2 of Insecure.
That's nice.
Yeah.
Well, it looks like we've kind of successfully done this program. So this wraps up our first 3. And we have, we're in the planning stages for organizing the next 3 conversations that will start in February. And we'll be doing 1 a month. We have Blue McWright, Lori Hogan, and Thomas Woodruff as our next 3. So those should be pretty exciting interviews as well. So Audrey, thank you so much. Thank you, Amy Gantman. Thank you to Hannah and Juliet for working behind the scenes. And everybody have a great evening and happy holidays. Take care, everybody.
Thank you. Good night.
Night.